The little town of West Burleigh in the early 50s was much like it had been for perhaps much of the 20th century thus far. When the Fleay family came to this part of southeast Queensland, West Burleigh had the railway station linking the district with Brisbane, the Hotel Glenville for the thirsty locals and rail passengers, Watson's and Fletcher's stores selling just about everything, Thompson's garage and Schuster's the blacksmiths, and just a few houses. There was a railway bridge across the Tallebudgera Creek. A bit further along that one and only street of West Burleigh was the turn-off to what was once a dairy farm and was to become Fleay's Fauna Reserve. West Burleigh now had a tourist attraction. The Fleay family chose the location for a number of reasons. On a hill. The main part of the farm was safely away from potential flooding from the Tallebudgera Creek. And the view was magnificent. From our wooden Queensland-style house, there was a splendid panorama of the Tallebudgera estuary, the Pacific Highway Bridge near the mouth of the creek, and the Pacific Ocean beyond. And on a good day, we could see coastal shipping, and sometimes even whales. We inherited the farm's resident draught horse, Old Tom, and there was one cow remaining from the former dairy farm herd to provide us with daily fresh milk. And, most importantly, there was room enough for my father David Fleay to build enclosures for his personal collection of animals, birds and reptiles. A large Moreton Bay fig tree close to our house was often noisy at nights, constantly invaded by fruit bats or flying foxes. These Dracula-like large bats only had a short distance to fly in from tropical rainforest patches in the Tallebudgera Valley. Wildlife knew this was a safe haven. The Fleay's Fauna Reserve entrance was a simple gate with that large boomerang, in honour of the Aboriginal residents who had been here for thousands of years before us. The most important part of the reserve in the early 50s was the platypussery. The resident platypuses would be fed at 3:30 each and every afternoon, and David Fleay was there to personally pour forth his expertise on one of the world's most unusual creatures. There was an elongated cement pool, and visitors would gather around to peer below and see the animals diving under the water to gather worms, freshwater crayfish, and even an egg mixture. From the start, we had to employ a full-time worm digger, as one platypus could eat up to 800 earthworms a day. And there were 2 to 3 platypuses in-house. Early on in the 50s, I was fascinated to see a grader and bulldozer at work gouging out the Fauna Reserve's first parking area. Gurgling sounds in a freshly created earthen cliff led to the appearance of some rather large creatures of the deep soil. Giant earthworms, which could be chopped up like macaroni for the platypuses, occasionally a tasty addition to the platypus diet. However, they did prefer the smaller worm variety. My father took photographs of me and the worms, which were, of course, quite harmless. Giant earthworms were the subject of one of David Fleay's early weekly articles for the Brisbane Courier-Mail newspaper. My father's nature notes were popular for many years with Queensland readers. The first giant worms appeared when our top parking area was being formed, in the bank just behind that 1954 Ford motor car. The Ford belonged to Walt Disney wildlife photographers Al and Elmer Millot, who spent at least 6 months filming at our reserve in 1955. Their project was to have been a full-length Walt Disney true-life adventure. The couple, famous for starting off these Disney nature features, were equipped with 16 and 35mm cine cameras, and they had a special movie set constructed, complete with a cutaway freshwater creek section. This so the platypus could be photographed up close and personal. For a number of reasons, the film was eventually released as Nature's Strangest Creatures, only 17 minutes long. So the Fauna Reserve had become a lure for people from every walk of life. Al Millot was there when we had a vice-regal visit. Lady Eileen Slim, the wife of the then Australian Governor-General, Sir William Slim, was shown around the Fauna Reserve by my parents, David and Sigrid Fleay. Al Millot joined the entourage. There he is in the background. When I rushed in front of Lady Slim to take this photograph, I was asked by the Governor-General's wife, "Shall I pose for you, Stephen?" Too late. I'd already taken the photo, and several more were to come. There's Al Millot on the left, and Lady Slim talking with my mother, with Winky the Wombat in attendance. The wife of the Queensland Governor, Lady Sybil Laverack, is on the right. The Laveracks were good friends of David and Sigrid Fleay. Earlier, they invited my parents, Sister Rosemary, this wombat, and a platypus and possum to Government House, Brisbane, to spend an hour and a half with Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip during their first royal visit to Australia. Here, Lady Sybil Laverack had moved around to gain a better view of Winky the Wombat. The Flinders Island wombat might even have received a vice-regal pat. The man with the hat in the background was the aide to Lady Slim. It was quite a day to have vice-royalty present at the Fauna Reserve. The ladies and their party had a picnic lunch in an old quarry on the road to West Burleigh, before returning to Government House, Brisbane. The people of West Burleigh and district were only too willing to lend their assistance to the Fleay family with their new Fauna Reserve. The Gallagher family lived on the hill just above the West Burleigh railway station. Peter Gallagher was one of the first helpers to feed the animals, birds and reptiles, clean cages, and collect the small entrance fee from visitors. Peter is here at the Gallagher family house with his younger sisters while their mother looks on. Paul Gallagher, Peter's younger brother, pictured on the front lawn of our house, started part-time during his school holidays, and later was with us full-time. We have remained good friends with the Gallagher families ever since those early days. My sister Rosemary tirelessly worked at the reserve, spending all her spare time helping our father and mother, caring for the wildlife at the Fauna Reserve. That's Rosie on the left. This group is at the Dingo enclosure. Next to my sister is Glenda Birch from West Burleigh. Glenda would assist with household duties. Then there's Hazel Andrews from Tallabudgera Valley. Hazel was a local identity and part-time helper. And there's Paul Gallagher, standing to attention, with the entrance fee collection bag. The initial charge to see our animals, birds and reptiles was 2 shillings for adults and 6pence for children. In those pre-television days, our nearest movie theatre was the Deluxe at Burleigh Heads. A hand-painted interval slide surely attracted people to Fleay's Fauna Reserve. Even though platypuses inhabited coastal freshwater creeks and rivers, this was a chance to see the animal at close quarters. And the people came to see this unique collection of animals, birds and reptiles. Visitors could see their fauna in the one large area of natural bushland. Public holidays, such as one Easter Sunday in 1954, meant that both our parking areas, the lower seen here, were full up. Some visitors were so keen to see the Fauna Reserve's collection that they even hired taxis from Brisbane, which was 60 miles to the north. A visit to Fleay's Fauna Reserve was always on the agenda for the Tallabudgera National Fitness Camp. Energetic young camp lodgers would walk in a large group from their camp at the mouth of the Tallabudgera Creek, up through the bush, along the hill ridge, and to the Fauna Reserve. Here's one fitness camp gathering resting on the hill near the platypus enclosure in the mid-1950s. David Fleay was always adding to his reserve. By walling off part of a valley, the Little Lake was formed, and this provided a great place for migratory birds, as well as for kangaroos and wallabies to take their refreshment. The Little Lake was to become the subject of a film by Lex Halliday, who recorded David Fleay's work with nature in the 1950s and 1960s. My mother, Mary Sigrid Fleay, loved to grow things, and in those early days we all lent a hand in the garden. Water and rock melons were delicious, and helped to trim down our grocery bills. We're pictured here in the front garden with my mother's pug dogs, Twinkle and Piccaninny. Our wooden Queensland house was cosy. Originally on stilts, everything was compact. Most importantly, though, the large dining room lounge table would be well used by my father, David Fleay, to write his articles and books, and lounge chairs were always a favourite of the pug dogs. All around the walls, occupying every space, paintings by David Fleay's mother, Maud Glover Fleay. Hardly enough room for the television set when this new medium arrived in the late 50s. Maud Glover Fleay painted much of the animal collection, making a perfect backdrop for the Duke and Duchess of Bedford, who visited in 1963. Special guests would be invited in for a cup of tea and to sign the visitors' book. The Duchess of Bedford enjoyed a cuddle with a kangaroo. This young grey licked the royal ear, probably a new taste to be gained from the upper reaches of the French-born Duchess. The Duke was then photographed with the amorous roux. During the visit, the Duke of Bedford was always seen holding the magazine Animals. He was promoting this then Nature publication, part of the reason for their tour of Australia. Quite okay, this is a lungfish, which can survive for a short while out of the water. A very ancient creature. Notice the large scales. The Duchess had a gentle and cautionary feel of the scales. Such an important couple in attendance at Fleay's Fauna Reserve in 1963 warranted the use of Kodachrome colour. The Duke and Duchess gladly posed with our view in the background. A rainy day, but coming from England they were well prepared. I'm happy to say that this small collection of pictures of the then Duke and Duchess of Bedford is now in the possession of the current Duke of Bedford, Andrew, at Woburn Abbey, England. My sister Betty also took Kodachromes. Here's some of the family in the front garden. To the left, Jack Thompson, later to become my sister Rosemary's husband. With Jack is Sylvia, Betty's border collie. There's Rosemary and Twinkle the pug, a young Stephen in school uniform, and Mary Sigrid Fleay, with Piccaninny the pug dog. Here we stood up for a different Kodachrome angle. I'm holding my box camera, which was used to take many of the black and white early pictures of West Burleigh and the Fauna Reserve. In order to include our sister Betty and her dog Sylvia, I took this picture with my box camera on black and white film. Betty was an avid Kodachrome photographer, and here's our father David Fleay at the rear of our Queensland house with a wombat. The original freshwater tank is to the right. Betty Fleay recorded the Fleay family gathering at a platypus hunt on the banks of the Nerang River around 1958. Standing at the back from the left are Rosemary and Jack Thompson, and Robert, my brother, with his wife Melwyn. My father, wearing his hat as always, is sitting alongside our mother Mary Sigrid Fleay. I had a day off from school. Looking for platypuses was sometimes a family event, and there was always a delicious picnic spread courtesy of our mother, who was the best of cooks. Naturalists from all over the world would visit the reserve at West Burleigh. The American Spalding family, you'll surely know the sporting goods, sponsored an expedition in 1958. The expedition was connected to the American Museum of Natural History. Here was a specially fitted out and very new Land Rover. The Spalding expedition team needed the help of one of the Fleays to look around the Fauna Reserve. I guess I must have used the shovel to dig around looking for something aquatic under the Talabudgera sand. A favourite spot of mine at the Fauna Reserve was the dingo enclosure. The animals would come up, wagging their tails, always friendly, and sometimes we'd communicate in a typical wild dog manner. Back in 1954, along with our first dingo Vicky, we'd often have howling sessions. My father included the picture of the musical duo in a Courier Mail article and his first Queensland book, Talking of Animals. A VIP dingo we named Ringo, As a puppy, he was taken up to Brisbane by Tony Devine, and handled and admired by Ringo Starr and the Beatles during their first tour of Australia. Puppies are always so cute, dingoes even more so, and the visitors loved to nurse and cuddle the so-called young Australian wild dogs. My father's special pet from the late 50s through to the mid-70s was Dot the dog. This little lady was no particular breed. She'd be with my father day and night, a constant and faithful companion. Dot would be next to David Fleay in the evenings to share the day's television news. However, there was some friction from Dot the dog if my father was too close to my mother's Pekingese, Miss Jetty, here at the house around 1975. Another pet was Boris the boa constrictor. Boris grew immensely, but in his early days was easy to hold, and always placid, so much so that at one time the snake was simply taken away from our property. Boris had been stolen. After the theft made it to all news outlets, the snake was recovered when someone was trying to sell it several miles from the Fauna Reserve. Boris was returned to his rightful owner. It's rather hard to conceal a 5-metre snake. Underneath our back stairs were housed 2 small taipan snakes. They'd been hatched from their mother's eggs at the Fauna Reserve and were tame only to my father. Notice how close the head is to my father's hand. This is the ultimate trust from one of the world's deadliest snakes. The main attraction at the Fauna Reserve was, of course, the platypus display. This was the only place in the world where the platypuses would be shown to the public with a live commentary by the only person at the time to have bred them in captivity. Whether just a few people turned up or many, David Fleay would make sure that no one was disappointed. He'd talk about his platypus experiences, results of his research, anecdotes. It was a display that only nature's gentleman could perform. Another famous resident of the reserve was Harriet the tortoise. From the Galapagos Islands, Harriet was born around 1830 and passed away in 2006. Her life spanned 3 centuries and 2 millennia. Quite a history with a splendid account of Harriet's life on Wikipedia and the writings of David Fleay and his daughter Rosemary Fleay Thompson. Rosemary's son Philip Thompson is here helping Harriet with some of her vegetarian diet, sometime in the 1960s. Harriet is thought to have been handled by Charles Darwin. Harriet was with us at the Fauna Reserve from 1952 until 1987. We loved this old lady. She was a friend to us all. Sick and injured animals, birds or reptiles would be brought to the Fauna Reserve, as it was considered a safe place to be, due to the personal care given by David Fleay, his family and helpers. The whistling kite had lost power in its wings and could not fly. The kite roamed the Fleay family front lawn for much of the later 20th century, after it was brought in by a concerned resident in the 1950s. You had to watch out if you didn't have shoes, as the bird would go for toes. Fresh meat, especially toes, were very inviting for this bird. Possums, so profuse in Australia and New Zealand. This Tasmanian brushtail never had to go out and about to Fossick for food. A delicious buffet was provided each and every day of his life. And the beautiful variation of the brushtail was David Fleay's specially bred golden possum, so tame and placid that it came to the entrance to the cage to pose for this 1965 Kodachrome. Of course, a slice of bread helped. A more northern member of the possum family is the cuscus. At Fleay's Fauna Reserve back then, these two were housed in such a way that they would be able to sleep most of the day in comparative darkness and come out to eat at night. Free to come and go as they please, birds such as pelicans would fly in for the free food on offer at Fleay's Fauna Reserve. So too the ducks. Here the kangaroos and wallabies feast on the banks of our little lake, fed by West Burleigh young helper Mark Justo. This is something definitely not to be tried at home. The milking of snakes, such as the death adder. Venom was extracted into a jar, dried and sent off to the Commonwealth Serum Laboratories for processing into anti-venene or anti-venom, and David Fleay extracted venom from many poisonous snakes. This enabled the saving of lives. Paul Gallagher would often assist the Australian naturalist in this most dangerous of tasks. Diane, Paul Gallagher's wife, would be there in the 60s at the koala display. Visitors could be photographed with Australia's living cuddly toy. David Fleay's animals, birds and reptiles were not just residents. They were all considered to be our friends. They understood each other. Here's an informal moment with a koala being nursed by another part-time staff member, Penny, while David Fleay offers his sunglasses. And my very favourite koala, Kodachrome. Monty was so placid and loved to cuddle up to one of the helpers, Miss Leanne. The bear always responded to the camera and must have been included in many home movies and photographs through his life. These little critters, according to David Fleay, have the softest fur of any living animal, sugar gliders peering into the daylight out of their hollowed-out log. This is really an old bustard. Don't get me wrong. The bush bustard, or plain turkey, used to strut proudly around its enclosure. There were more fearsome creatures housed at the reserve, such as a crocodile. The jaws were so fast that even a high camera shutter speed failed to freeze the action. And then there was Alice the alligator. She originally came from overseas, from around Florida. No one was eaten or bitten at the Fauna Reserve, although there's still the mystery of that pair of shoes found one day in the croc and alligator enclosure. We hope in retrospect that this was some person's practical joke. Without a doubt, Fleay's Fauna Reserve housed the largest private collection of Australian animals, birds and reptiles anywhere, in as close to their natural environment as possible and kept with the utmost care and attention. David Fleay was completely devoted to nature. The West Burleigh Fauna Reserve and the scientific work of David Fleay was often a major part of television documentaries. Australian media personality Bob Raymond, on the right, brought along his crew to make a program in 1965. The documentary host was author Alan Moorhead, sitting to the left. I photographed Judith Wright, the Australian poet, in the late 60s, near the dingo enclosure with a small grey kangaroo. Judith Wright was an avid conservationist and a family friend. With David Fleay, Kathleen MacArthur and Brian Clouston, Judith Wright was a founding member and, from 1964 to 1976, president of the Wildlife Preservation Society of Queensland. Our front veranda firstly was a shop for visitors. That shop was eventually moved to the front entrance. My mother in later years enjoyed the privacy of this semi-outdoor space, especially in the company of one of her pets, such as Jetty the Pekingese. What a splendid family reunion this was. My father was reunited with his sister Mary Beasy, who came to live nearby to our fauna reserve, and brother Bill Fleay, who had a sheep property near Ballarat, Victoria. This was probably one of the only pictures of the three Fleay originals, together in their later years. They'd previously been in family portraits as children, back in the early part of the 20th century. Mary Beasy is holding one of her brother's books at the time, and the family seem as though they'd never been apart. Mary Beasy unsuccessfully tried to remove her brother David's hat for the photo shoot. The hat stayed in place, as it always did. There are countless photographic memories of those special days when the Fleay family were at their West Burleigh Fauna Reserve. My favourite memories are captured in this restored Kodachrome of the splendid view in 1965. then uncluttered, now overwhelmed by the profusion of nature. David Fleay insisted when handing over his Fauna Reserve to the Queensland government that it not be subject to commercial development, which had overtaken much of the Gold Coast, that the area be kept for the animals, birds and reptiles of Australia, a safe and secure area where not only nature could thrive and survive, but where people, who ultimately control nature's destiny, could witness the grandness of it all. But please bear in mind my father's own words about the conservation of wildlife.
Oh, well, a little bit of sanity, a little bit of thought for the future. Not just to go along enjoying yourself as things are, but to try and do something about preserving what should remain. That book, Silent Spring, by Rachel Carson, created a real sort of revolution in America, but its effects out here have not been felt, because there you've got a greater concentration of population and a lot more people who have a conscience about these things.